Okay, in this tutorial we're going to start to look at Arnold. We have our Arnold lights and our Arnold renderer that we need to initiate. So when we come in here, and if I go to Create menu and I go to Lights, you see we have the ability to use our photometric lights. If we are not in the Arnold renderer, then we're going to have some issues with Arnold lights. So make sure you're in the Arnold renderer. We won't be able to use the materials, and we won't be able to use the lights if we're not there. So just click on Renderer, Arnold, and then you'll see that we have some different options. We have the Arnold renderer here, and we'll be making changes in the samples for ray depth shortly. But under System, if you have any materials that are standard materials, or let's say you have some mental ray materials, then you're going to need to replace the mental ray materials. But the standard materials, you can check on Legacy 3ds Max support. And if you click that on here, then you'll be able to use those. Otherwise, it will cause an error when you go to render. So just watch for that. So now we're going to go and create some Arnold lights. Under Light, our default is the photometric lights, and we're going to change that to Arnold. And they only give you one light type in Arnold. So I'm just going to click in the scene and create a light. And after you create that, we'll go to the Modifier tab, and now we have access to the parameters for this light. So I'm just going to pull this light up, and right now I don't have any target for this. It's set as a quad, and here we have the size and shape of the quad. So we can go and adjust roundness for this and round out the quad light. Create a portal. This would be if we're using it as a window. And right now I'm just going to change this to a spotlight. And now if I pull this up, you'll see we have more of a spot parameter. And we can say target it, and now we have a target I can grab and manipulate. So I'm going to pull that over and target towards the little teapots here, and just pull this light back into the scene. So you'll see that there are quite a few different Arnold light types, but again, when you go to create this light, it's just going to be one standard light that you create, which is a quad by default. So we can make a point light, a distant light, a disc-shaped light, a cylinder light, sky dome. You can make photometric or mesh, so we can use mesh and generate a light from it. So we're just going to stick with this spotlight just to give a quick introduction to Arnold in this tutorial. So right now I just have my default lights in the scene. I don't have the viewport showing the lights. So if I click and go down to Material and Lighting, I can illuminate with scene lights. And with the Arnold lights, you're just going to get this overblown look. You can go down to Views, Show Material and Viewport, and we just want to make sure it's realistic with maps. And then if we have maps, it'll be a little clearer. But right now we just have this overblown light. So we have similar controls as we do with our photometric lights. We can adjust the color. We can come down here and enter a Kelvin value. We can also use presets for different types of light bulb. And here we have our intensity and our exposure control. So with the exposure control at a setting of 8, it takes and multiplies our intensity and by a power of 2, and we end up with a intensity of 256. So when we're doing this, we'll take a quick render, and we can use the reduction render here. You'll see it's processing, and we're getting a very dark render, and I can see the spotlight here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to adjust this. Now the exposure only goes up to 16. So let's just start moving this. We'll move this up to 16. It's going to double our lights. We get a nice big bright light. And I'm going to zoom in on this shot a little bit more, just so we can see. You see, compared to the photometric lights, you immediately get a really beautiful light setup. We have nice reflectivity on the surfaces. It does look like a nice, more realistic lighting. So this is a little bit hot with my highlights, so I may want to go in and adjust this a little bit more. So if I come in and we'll bring this down, so we were at 8, let's go to 10 and see where we're at. Alright, so that's a lot darker. I think we're going to be at 14 for this. That looks better. So my floor is gray, and we're getting a lot of specular hits that are nice and hard. We will look at materials in a different tutorial, but we're just going to do a quick overview on these light settings. Okay, so we can make different changes. So again, if we want to make a little bit more realistic light, we can come in here and pick a Kelvin value. So 6500 is similar to the sunlight, and that's going to be a nice white or really non-tinted light. If I were to bring this down, we're going to get a more orange light. If I bring it up, we're going to get a bluer light. So you can see that in the preview. I'm going to bring this down a little bit to make it look more like an indoor lighting, and bring a little orange into the light. So if I have an older light bulb, something that you might have in your kitchen, a warmer light, we're going to bring a little warmth into the scene from that. And I'm just going to zoom in just a little bit more in this scene and do another render, so we can really see the details here. So you'll see it is processing. It takes a little bit of time to process. And what we're seeing here is what's called buckets as it goes through and processes the lights. And Arnold does take a lot longer to render, but you do get a much more beautiful result without too much effort. You do have to play a lot with the render settings. Here we do have very little noise, but a bit of noise in our shadows. And again, we have our target light set on. We have a distance we can adjust. In our parameters, we are casting shadows, and we can adjust the intensity, the density of our shadows. So if we wanted to, have more of a bounce in these shadows and save time, we could fake it. If we wanted to save time on rendering without doing a indirect bounce, we can go and play with the density of the shadows. Take a render of that, and you'll see it looks like we have some bounce going on. So it's just a quick fix. I'm going to bring that back up to 1, and then we'll take a look at some of the other settings. So once you have your general exposure, you will change this as we get into the rendering. And when we come into our render settings, again, we're using our Arnold. Just be aware that you have a target here, and by default it goes to the cloud 365. I like to put it on production render and make sure that I'm saving things to my computer. So go into your common tab, and when you're making saves, pick your location if you actually want to export a save. Right now I'm on one single frame, Again, under the system, I want to make sure I have legacy supported. If I have any basic 3D Studio Max standard materials, then those will not render properly without this checked. In our Arnold settings, we have our preview is set to -3, and this is the default setting for this. You'll see if you hover over, it's going to give you a quick tip, and it says a low negative value is going to be a fast render before the main subsampling. Down here we have our diffuse, so our base color, our specular hit, our transmission, so we have any light transmission or subsurface scatter. So here we have our camera and how many bounces we're assigning to the camera. The camera is added to or multiplied with the samples applied here for our transmission, for our spec, and for our diffuse. And then our ray depth is only set to 1. I can raise the bounces. And here you're going to see the minimum and maximum. So here is the maximum amount of rays for our ray depth we're allowing, and then the maximum amount of rays for transparency. So I have 8 for our transmission, and then I have 1 for specular, and if I have 2 for diffuse, it's only going to read up to 10. So I need to raise this number. I'm going to raise up to 12. And then we're going to do another render. And this render looks fine, so I really don't need to do too many more. I do have a little bit of noise here. 3 set for the camera is low. If I go up to 4 or 5, now we're more at a medium setting. Again, I raise this up. And we can get a little bit less noise on our shadows by raising this. Sometimes you'll end up with a little noise in your render, and this should get rid of some of that. Okay, so that's the basic settings. Again, we'll take a look at this in more depth.